The snow was falling in thick, powdery flakes, covering the world in a blanket of cold white. Christmas Eve had always been a time of joy, but this year it felt different. The house was adorned with twinkling lights, and the smell of roasted turkey filled the air, yet my heart was heavy. I could feel the tension in the room, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. I tried to keep my head down, focusing on the task in front of me, sorting out the last-minute gifts, making sure everything was perfect for the evening. But then, it happened. "Why are you always so lazy?" My brother Adam snapped from across the room. His words felt like a slap across my face. I froze, my hands stilling as the weight of his accusations settled on me like an anvil. I could hear the laughter and chatter of my family in the next room, oblivious to the storm brewing in our small kitchen. Adam's voice cut through the holiday cheer like a knife. His words were sharp, biting, and cruel. I wasn't sure if it was the stress of the holiday or something deeper, but I couldn't just let him get away with it. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trying to hold on to my composure. "You heard me," he retorted, his face twisted with irritation. "You do nothing around here, always hiding behind that lazy attitude. Everyone else works hard, but you just sit there, doing nothing." His words hit me harder than I expected. There it was, the old, familiar criticism that I had been trying to escape for years. Always the lazy one. Always the disappointment. He didn't know what was happening in my life, didn't know what I was going through. To him, I was just the one who never did enough. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. What was the point? He never listened. Adam never saw the things I struggled with. The weight of my own failures hung over me like a shadow, and no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough for anyone. "Maybe if you actually tried, you'd see how much I do around here," I finally spat out, my eyes burning with frustration. For a moment, there was silence, and for a fleeting second, I thought it was over. But then, I saw it, the smirk on Adam's face. He wasn't just angry. He was mocking me. And that was the last straw. "I don't need to take this," I said, my voice now trembling with the emotions I had tried to bury. "You have no idea what's really going on." I turned away from him, my heart pounding in my chest. His words stung, and they weren't just about Christmas. They were about everything. The years of judgment, the misunderstandings, the constant feeling of not being good enough. But tonight, things would be different. Tonight, everything was about to change. I went to my room, slamming the door behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, my face buried in the pillows. The tears came without warning. I had tried to hold it all in, but Adam's words had cracked something inside me. And now, everything poured out. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't. But how could I explain the weight of my silent battles? How could I make anyone understand? The truth was, I was drowning. Drowning in the expectations of others. In the expectations I had set for myself. I had never been enough for anyone, and now, it seemed like I would never be. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I wiped my tears and glanced at the screen. A text from Mom. "Where are you? Dinner's ready. Come join us." I stared at the message, the lump in my throat growing. I wanted to go. I wanted to be a part of the celebration, to pretend everything was fine, but how could I? How could I sit there and smile when everything felt so wrong? When I felt so invisible, so misunderstood? But then, another text came through, this one from my dad. "Adam's been saying things. Is everything all right?" I paused. Dad knew. He always knew when something was off. I couldn't avoid him forever, so I stood up, wiped my face, and walked downstairs. The house was warm, full of people, laughter, and the sound of Christmas music playing in the background, but none of it reached me. It all felt so distant, like I was in a different world. I sat at the table, trying to appear normal, trying to push down the anger and hurt bubbling inside me. Adam avoided my gaze, focusing on his plate, but I could feel the tension still simmering between us. Mom and Dad exchanged worried glances, but neither of them said a word. It wasn't until after dinner, when everyone was gathered in the living room, that my dad pulled me aside. "Let's talk," he said, his voice low and serious. I nodded and followed him to the small study in the corner of the house. "Your brother has a way of pushing people, especially you," he said, leaning against the desk. "But I want you to know something. You're not lazy. You've always done your best. And that's what matters. But it's never enough, Dad," I said, the frustration pouring out of me. "I've always been the one who messes up, the one who can't live up to their expectations. I can't even get through one Christmas without feeling like I'm failing." He sighed and stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You have to stop measuring yourself by what others think. You're not defined by their opinions, especially not Adam's. You're more than that." His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I felt the anger and resentment melt away. Maybe I had been looking at things all wrong. Maybe it wasn't about proving myself to anyone else. Maybe it was about finding peace within myself. But before I could process everything, the door swung open, and Adam stepped inside. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now. I was frustrated. "And yeah, I was wrong. I'm sorry." I looked at him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. For the first time tonight, I saw it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The next few hours felt like a blur. After Adam's apology, we didn't speak much, but the weight between us had shifted. The tension that had suffocated the room was now gone. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As the evening wore on, I found myself sitting by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered streets. The world seemed so still, so peaceful. But inside, I was anything but calm. The events of the day had left me with a lot to think about, a lot to process. What had I been running from? Why had I let myself get caught in the cycle of judgment and guilt? I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Adam standing in the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice quiet. I shook my head, motioning for him to come in. We both sat there, staring out at the snow, our words unspoken but understood. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I never really understood what you were going through. I thought it was just about laziness. But I see now that it's more than that." I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long while I felt heard, maybe not fully understood, but heard. And that was enough for now. Christmas morning arrived, and the house was quiet. The arguments, the accusations, the silence, all of it seemed like a distant memory. We exchanged gifts, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just between me and Adam, but within myself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was failing. I wasn't the lazy one. I wasn't the screw-up. I was just me, imperfect, but enough. It wasn't a perfect Christmas, but it was a real one. The kind of Christmas that reminded me of the importance of family, of honesty, and of the power of forgiveness. And as I sat there, surrounded by the people I loved, I realized that the greatest gift I could give myself was the permission to let go of the past that had been holding me back, the past that had made me believe I wasn't enough. It wasn't just about what Adam thought of me. It was about what I thought of myself. As the days went by, things between Adam and me slowly returned to normal. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of tension, but we both tried. We tried to understand each other more, to be patient, and to forgive. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made all the difference. And as for me, I finally realized that the only person I needed to prove myself to was me. I didn't need anyone else's validation to know my worth. I was enough. That Christmas, I learned something important. It wasn't about the gifts or the perfect family moments. It was about the lessons we learn, the growth we experience, and the connections we build. It was about understanding that sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones that hurt the most, are the ones that lead us to the greatest change. When my brother yelled at me that night, I thought my world was falling apart. But in the end, it was the catalyst I needed to break free from the chains of guilt and self-doubt. I wasn't lazy. I was human. And that was enough. The warmth of the Christmas decorations and the festive ambiance seemed so distant now. The lights that had once been so magical now just blinked in the background, a silent reminder of how easily a joyful holiday could turn sour. I sat in my room, the weight of the night pressing heavily on my chest. I could hear the soft murmur of conversations downstairs, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, but it all felt so far away, like a different world. I couldn't escape the bitter taste of Adam's words. He had always been like that, quick to criticize, slow to understand. Growing up, it was as though he could do no wrong, while I was always the one who fell short. The more I tried to prove myself, the more it seemed like nothing would ever be good enough. Tonight had been no exception. It felt like I was back to square one, lost in the chaos of expectations that had never been my own. But there was something different this time. The sting of Adam's words still hurt, but there was a fire inside me, a flicker of something I hadn't felt before. As much as I wanted to shut down and hide, something deep inside told me that I couldn't let this moment pass without standing up for myself. I wasn't going to let this be the way I remembered Christmas. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. It was time to face this. I had to walk back into that living room, not as the broken, quiet sister who always took the blame, but as someone who had finally had enough. As I made my way downstairs, my heart pounded in my chest. The laughter and chatter grew louder, but I felt strangely detached. I stood in the doorway of the living room observing my family gathered around the Christmas tree. Mom and Dad were sitting on the couch, smiling and chatting, while Adam sat on the armrest of the chair across from them, his arms crossed, a defensive posture. I could see the remnants of the argument in the way his shoulders were tense, but he made no effort to look at me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For the first time in years, I felt the courage to speak up. "Adam," I said, my voice clear but shaking, "we need to talk." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he wasn't expecting this. The rest of the room fell silent as everyone turned their attention toward us. I felt the eyes of my parents on me. Mom looked concerned, and Dad looked, well, like he had seen this coming. But there was no turning back now. I stepped into the room, my voice stronger than before. "You've been calling me lazy for years, but you have no idea what I've been going through. None of you do. You think that I don't care, but that couldn't be further from the truth. You think I've been sitting here doing nothing, but what you don't see is the pressure I've been under, the weight of expectations that I could never live up to." Adam shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face was still hard, but there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I don't know what you expect from me," I continued, feeling my emotions start to swell. "I'm not perfect. I've never been perfect. But you don't get to judge me for trying to figure things out. You don't get to make me feel like I'm worthless just because I'm not on your timeline, or living up to your version of success. You have no idea how much I've been battling inside, and it's not fair for you to act like I'm just lazy. I'm tired of being the one who always gets pushed aside." My voice was rising with each word, and I felt the heat of my anger and frustration surge through me. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. I was no longer the quiet one in the corner, letting things slide. I was done with that. Adam opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not done yet. You need to listen to me, because for once, I'm not backing down." The room was dead silent. My parents were watching closely, but Adam just stared at me, his mouth slightly open as if he didn't know what to say. This was the first time in forever that I had spoken to him like this, the first time I had made myself heard. "I've been struggling, Adam," I said softly now, my voice breaking slightly. "I've been trying to keep everything together, trying to survive, and you just keep piling on more. You don't see the weight I carry every day, and I can't keep pretending like I'm fine when I'm not. And you know what? I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough. Tired of feeling like I'm invisible to you all. I'm done with it. I'm not lazy. I'm just human." Adam's face softened then, the hardness in his features melting away as he finally seemed to understand. He shifted his position and then stood up, walking over to me. I expected him to get defensive again, but instead he just sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if he was carrying the weight of his own guilt. "I didn't know," he muttered, his voice low and regretful. "I didn't know how much you were dealing with. I was just frustrated. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." The apology hung in the air, heavy and honest, and for the first time in years, I saw the brother I used to know, the one who cared, even if he didn't always show it. I was still angry, but in that moment I felt a shift. "I don't expect you to understand everything," I said, my voice softer now, "but I need you to trust that I'm doing the best I can. I don't need your judgment. I just need your support." He nodded slowly, the weight of the conversation sinking in. For once, there was no sarcasm, no defensiveness, just quiet understanding. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try. I'm sorry." And for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't perfect, and I wasn't magically healed, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the burden of everything alone. The room stayed quiet for a few moments as everyone processed the exchange. My parents exchanged looks, but no one interrupted. There was something unspoken in the air, something that had shifted between all of us. The unresolved tension, the hurt, it was still there, but it felt like we were finally beginning to address it. I took a step back and glanced at Adam, offering him a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, things could change. "Thanks," I said quietly. "That means a lot." And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally start healing. Not just from the argument, but from all the years of built-up frustration and pain. Maybe this Christmas, the greatest gift wasn't the presents or the food, but the chance to finally be seen. To finally be heard. And for that, I was grateful. The Christmas lights continued to flicker in the background, a stark contrast to the calm that had settled in the room. The soft hum of the television from the living room filled the silence, but it was almost drowned out by the whirlwind of thoughts in my head. For the first time, I felt like I had said what I needed to say. Really said it. Not just a passive, muffled response to Adam's criticism, but the raw truth, the pain, the hidden parts of me that I had been too afraid to show. I glanced around the room, seeing my family in a new light. They were all present, yet still, there was a barrier between us. A wall of unspoken words, judgments, and misconceptions that had built up over the years. It wasn't just about Adam and me. It was about all of us. The unaddressed issues, the things we never talked about, the cracks that we all pretended didn't exist. But the truth was, they were there. And if I didn't confront them now, then when? Adam seemed different now, standing in front of me with his hands in his pockets, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with something more vulnerable, something real. The guilt on his face was palpable, but so was something else. I didn't know what it was yet. Maybe it was remorse or maybe understanding. But it was a shift that gave me hope. "Listen," I said, breaking the silence. "I don't expect everything to change overnight. I don't expect us to suddenly be perfect. But we need to be real with each other. We need to stop pretending like everything is fine when it's not." Adam nodded, his eyes softening as he took in my words. "I get it. You're right. I've been so caught up in my own frustrations that I forgot what really matters. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there for each other. And I've let that slip. I could feel the sincerity in his voice, but there was also something else, something deeper. It was as if he finally realized that the tension between us wasn't just about me being lazy or not living up to expectations. It was about something far more complex. It was about the pressure, the constant comparisons, and the weight we had all been carrying, but never acknowledged. "You've always been the one who's had everything together," I said almost to myself. "The golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And I've always been the one who couldn't quite measure up. But I don't want that anymore. I don't want to live my life in your shadow, or anyone's shadow for that matter." Adam looked taken aback, but his eyes softened. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now, as if he were trying to find the right words. "I never meant to make you feel that way. You've always been important to me. I guess I just didn't know how to show it." There it was, the unspoken truth that had been buried for so long. The realization that we had both been trapped in this cycle of misunderstanding. Adam had his own burdens, his own struggles, and I had been too focused on my own pain to see that. It wasn't just about my shortcomings. It was about both of us, navigating a world full of pressure and expectations that we didn't know how to handle. "You know," I said, a small tentative smile forming on my lips, "I think we've been stuck in this weird loop, both of us. But maybe it's time to break out of it." Adam raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk, but it was softer, almost like a realization was dawning on him too. "Yeah, I think you might be right." I looked over at my parents, who were still watching us with quiet interest. Dad's face was unreadable, but Mom's eyes were filled with something else. Relief. Maybe. It was as if, in this moment, she too could finally exhale. The elephant in the room, the long-standing tension between Adam and me, had been addressed. The crack was no longer ignored. We had finally brought it to light, and in doing so, it felt like we had the chance to rebuild. "Let's just start fresh," I suggested, my voice more confident now. "No more pretending, no more sweeping things under the rug. Let's be honest with each other from now on." Adam nodded slowly, a genuine smile now tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Deal." As we stood there, the weight of the argument, the hurt, and the misunderstandings began to feel lighter, almost as if it were dissolving into the air. I could feel the tension evaporating, leaving a space where something new could take root, something healthier, something real. "I'm glad we talked," I said, my voice quieter now, filled with a sense of peace that had been missing just hours ago. "Me too," Adam replied, his tone soft but sincere. "It's about time we stopped pretending everything was perfect." A comfortable silence settled between us, the kind that was familiar, but also foreign. For the first time, it felt like we were truly seeing each other. Not through the lens of old arguments or resentments, but as two people who had been carrying their own burdens and were now willing to share the load. I glanced around at my family once more, seeing them not as strangers or distant figures, but as the people who, despite everything, still meant the world to me. We weren't perfect, none of us. But in that moment, I realized that maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to be perfect. Maybe we just needed to be honest, to be there for each other, and to let go of the expectations that had been stifling us all these years. And as I stood there, with Adam by my side and the warmth of the holiday around me, I knew that this Christmas was going to be different. It wasn't about the presents or the meals or the decorations. It was about the gift of understanding, of breaking down the walls that had kept us apart, and of giving each other the space to grow. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. We'd have more arguments, more misunderstandings, more moments of frustration. But at least now, we had a foundation to build on. A foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and, most importantly, love. "Let's go back to the others," I said, my voice filled with quiet resolve. "Christmas isn't over yet." Adam smiled and nodded. "Yeah, let's make it a Christmas we actually remember." And with that, we walked back into the living room, not as two siblings locked in a cycle of frustration, but as two people finally learning how to understand each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for me. As the evening wore on, the laughter and conversations resumed. The warmth of the fire crackled in the background, and I felt something inside me stir, something lighter, something hopeful. Maybe this Christmas wouldn't be the perfect holiday we had all envisioned, but it would be the one we'd remember for its honesty, its healing, and the promise that things could change. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The greatest gift I had received this Christmas wasn't wrapped in paper or tied with a bow. It was the gift of being seen, of being understood. And as we all sat together, surrounded by the ones we loved, I knew that the most important thing was that we were finally, truly, together. The night was winding down, and the chaos of the day was starting to settle into a soft hum. The living room was cozy, filled with the comforting sounds of laughter, soft conversations, and the occasional clinking of glasses. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, its lights reflecting the warm golden hues of the room. The festive atmosphere was once again in full swing, but this time, something felt different. Something had shifted. I glanced over at Adam, who was sitting on the arm of the couch, engaged in a conversation with our parents. He seemed more relaxed, more present than he had been all evening. There was no defensiveness in his posture, no hint of the frustration that had marked earlier moments. He was just here. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself appreciating his company without the cloud of resentment hanging over me. Maybe this Christmas would be the one we would remember, not for the gifts or the perfect dinners, but for the rawness of it all, the honesty that had finally broken through. As I sat back on the couch, the warmth of the fire casting shadows on the walls, I realized something. I was starting to forgive myself. For too long, I had carried the weight of everyone's expectations, trying to measure up to a standard that I had never set for myself. I had been so focused on being everything for everyone else that I had forgotten about myself. Forgotten that I was worthy of love, of understanding, of space to just be. Do you feel that? Mom's voice interrupted my thoughts. She was sitting beside me now, her gentle smile soothing the tension I didn't realize I'd been holding in my shoulders. I looked at her, confused. Feel what? The shift in the air, she said softly, her eyes warm with a knowing glance. It's like we've all let go of something tonight. I followed her gaze, glancing around the room at the faces of my family. Dad was talking quietly with Adam, his hand resting on his son's shoulder in a rare moment of affection. There was a sense of peace between them that hadn't been there before. Even my younger sister, who usually kept to herself, was laughing with us, her usual standoffish demeanor softened by the understanding that hung in the air. Mom's words lingered in my mind as I let out a slow breath. Maybe this was the kind of Christmas that mattered. The kind that wasn't defined by perfection or material things. It was about moments like this, where we let down our guards and saw each other for who we truly were, beyond the mistakes and misunderstandings. I had been angry for so long, trapped in my own bitterness, but now I could see how much that anger had kept me from truly connecting. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I feel it too." Mom smiled softly, squeezing my hand. Sometimes, all it takes is one real conversation to change everything. And just like that, I understood. It wasn't about the big gestures or grand apologies. It was the small, vulnerable moments where we finally spoke our truths and let the walls crumble. That was what had happened tonight. The words we had been too afraid to say had finally come pouring out, and in doing so, they created space for something better to take its place. The rest of the evening passed by in a haze of warmth and laughter. We shared stories, told jokes, and even played games. But beneath all the noise, I could feel the undercurrent of change. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was there. A quiet promise that things could be different. that we could be different. At some point, I found myself standing at the window, staring out at the snow falling gently outside. It was peaceful. Beautiful, even. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with myself. The storm inside me had calmed, and I no longer felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. Maybe I wasn't perfect, and maybe my family wasn't perfect either, but we were learning, we were trying. And that was enough. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned to see Adam standing beside me. He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. For a brief second, I wondered if the old dynamic between us would return, if the tension would rise once more. But instead, he simply smiled. "Thanks for saying what needed to be said," he said quietly, his voice sincere. I nodded, the lump in my throat threatening to rise again. No problem. It was long overdue. We stood there for a moment side by side, both of us looking out at the winter scene. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental, like we were finally on the same page, finally seeing each other for who we really were. "I'm glad we did this," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," Adam replied, his voice carrying the weight of an apology that had long been overdue. "I don't want to fight anymore, not over stupid things." And just like that, something inside me shifted once again. The burden I had been carrying for so long seemed to lighten, and I realized that Adam's words were more than just a fleeting apology. They were a promise that even if we didn't always get it right, we would keep trying, and that was enough for me. The clock struck midnight, signaling the start of Christmas Day, and for the first time in years, it felt like the beginning of something new. Something real. I turned back to Adam, offering him a small, genuine smile. "Merry Christmas, Adam. Merry Christmas, sis," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As the new day began, I realized that the best gift of all wasn't the gifts under the tree or the festive meals we had shared. It was the gift of being seen, being heard, and being understood. It was the gift of healing, of reconciliation, and of finally letting go of the past. And with that, I knew that this Christmas I had found something far more valuable than anything wrapped in paper. I had found peace. The sun had barely begun to rise on Christmas morning, casting a soft, golden light through the windows. The house was quiet, save for the occasional sound of footsteps as we all moved about, adjusting to the stillness that followed the night of emotional breakthroughs. The tension that had lingered for years between Adam and me was finally gone. The weight of unspoken words had been lifted, replaced by an unspoken understanding. It felt like we were all breathing easier now, more at peace with each other than we had been in a long time. I woke up early, the soft hum of the Christmas morning feeling foreign yet comforting. The house was still. The day ahead promised more laughter, more joy, and the kind of moments we had all been craving. I pulled on my robe, the warmth of it cocooning me as I stepped down the stairs. The scent of freshly brewed coffee greeted me, and I made my way to the kitchen where I found my mom quietly preparing breakfast. "Good morning," I said, my voice still thick with sleep, but filled with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in ages. Mom looked up and smiled, her eyes soft with the same peace that had settled over me. "Good morning, sweetheart. I was just about to start breakfast. You want to help?" I nodded, moving to the counter where the ingredients for a large breakfast were spread out: eggs, bacon, potatoes, and fresh bread. It was our tradition to have a big Christmas morning breakfast, and somehow it felt like the perfect way to start the day. A meal that wasn't about perfection, but about the simple comfort of family. As we worked in the kitchen, I found myself reflecting on the events of the previous night. The raw emotions, the difficult conversations, and the vulnerability that had filled the room. There was no denying that something had shifted. I had expected Christmas to be just another holiday, another day of fake smiles and forced joy, but this time it felt real. We had finally started to address the things that had been left unspoken for too long. "How are you feeling, honey?" Mom asked as she stirred the eggs in the pan, her gaze shifting to me with a tenderness that made me feel safe. I paused, the question catching me off guard. I hadn't really stopped to ask myself that in a while. How was I feeling? I'm okay, I said slowly, the words feeling lighter than I expected. Better than I felt in a long time, actually. I think I'm finally starting to let go of everything that's been holding me back. Mom nodded, her expression knowing. Letting go is hard, especially when you've carried things for so long. But you're doing it. You're allowing yourself to heal. I smiled at her, grateful for her understanding. It wasn't just the holiday season that had changed, it was the way we saw each other now. We were no longer pretending, no longer avoiding the uncomfortable. We were allowing ourselves to be human, flawed, and real. Just as I set the table, Adam walked into the kitchen, his eyes still heavy with sleep but soft and warm. He had always been the early riser, the one who could never sleep in on Christmas morning. He greeted Mom with a sleepy good morning before his gaze landed on me. "Hey," he said, his voice tentative, as if unsure of how to approach me after everything that had been said the night before. I looked up at him, offering a small, genuine smile. "Morning." He paused for a moment, then walked over to where I was standing, putting a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt both natural and new. "I'm really sorry, he said quietly, for everything I said." The apology was simple, but it meant more than any elaborate excuse or defense could have. It wasn't just about words. It was about recognizing the hurt that had been caused and taking responsibility for it. I could see in his eyes that he was sincere. The anger, the frustration, all of it was gone. And in its place, there was understanding. "I know," I replied softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I've been holding on to a lot of stuff too. But it's okay. We're okay now." Adam's expression softened, and for a moment, we just stood there in comfortable silence. I didn't need anything more from him. I didn't need a grand gesture or anything to prove that things had changed. The simple fact that we were both willing to let go of the past and move forward was enough. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of laughter and light-hearted conversation. We sat down together at the table, sharing the breakfast we had prepared, the warmth of the meal filling the room with a sense of belonging. The cracks that had once threatened to tear us apart were now mended, not perfectly, but enough to allow for healing. There was no more pretending that everything was fine, no more hiding our true selves behind facades. We were learning to accept each other, flaws and all, and that in itself was a gift. As the day went on, we exchanged gifts, shared stories, and reveled in the joy of simply being together. It wasn't the grand Christmas we had all expected, filled with extravagant gifts or picture-perfect moments. But it was a real Christmas. A Christmas full of raw emotions, unexpected apologies, and the kind of love that only comes when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. Later in the afternoon, we gathered around the living room, enjoying some quiet time together. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth making the cold outside feel miles away. We all sat there, just being. No more tension, no more unresolved words hanging in the air. I realized that what we had now was something that couldn't be bought or wrapped in a box. It was the kind of connection that took time, effort, and most importantly, honesty. As I looked around at my family, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. The Christmas of conflict and hidden resentments had turned into a Christmas of understanding, growth, and acceptance. And though we still had a long way to go, the journey had begun. "Thanks for being patient with me," I said, quietly, my voice breaking the silence, "for letting me say what I needed to say, for really listening." Adam, who had been leaning back in his chair, glanced over at me, a small, sincere smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're welcome. We all need to hear each other more." I nodded, the weight of his words settling in. He was right. Communication was the key to everything: healing, growth, and love. Without it, we would remain stuck in the same cycle of misunderstandings, but with it, anything was possible. "Happy Christmas," I whispered, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. "Happy Christmas," Adam replied, and this time the words felt real, and in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire, the love of my family, and the peace that had finally settled in my heart, I knew that this was a Christmas we would all remember, for it was the one that marked the beginning of something new, a new chapter in our lives, where we no longer hid from our truths, but faced them together. Christmas Day ended not with fanfare, but with a quiet sense of resolution. The weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. The love that had been buried under layers of silence and misunderstanding was now able to breathe. The healing was far from over, but we had started something important. The hardest step had been taken. We had decided to change. As the day came to a close and the house grew quiet again, I sat by the window, staring out at the snow that still fell softly from the sky. I thought about everything that had transpired, the argument, the apologies, the healing, and I realized something. It wasn't about what we had done wrong or how much we had hurt each other. It was about how we had chosen to move forward. This Christmas had given me something far more valuable than any gift could provide. It had given me the strength to finally accept myself and the courage to let go of the past. It had given me a family who was willing to listen, to understand, and to love, even when it wasn't easy. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer the person I had been. I wasn't perfect, but I was enough, just as my family was enough, and together we would continue to grow, to understand, and to love. That was the gift I had been waiting for all along. The days after Christmas seemed to stretch out in a blur, like a dream slowly fading into the quiet of reality. I could still feel the warmth of that day, the feeling of having finally been seen, truly seen, for who I was, and the sense of peace that followed. But as time went on, I began to realize something important. The work wasn't over. The healing wasn't instant, and the change didn't come in one sweeping moment. It was going to take time. Adam and I had made progress, yes. The old dynamics between us had shifted, but there were still lingering habits, old wounds, unspoken things that still needed addressing. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was no longer afraid of the hard conversations. I wasn't afraid to confront the discomfort that came with real change. In fact, I was ready for it. We all slipped back into our routines after the holidays. The house went quiet once more, and the hustle of life resumed. But there was something different this time. It wasn't just about the surface-level pleasantries or the traditional holiday cheer. This time, the silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like space, a space for growth, for understanding, and for the new version of our family to emerge. One afternoon, about a week after Christmas, I was sitting in the living room when Adam came over to me, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a small envelope in the other. He was still trying to find the words, still a little unsure of himself after everything that had been said. But I could see the genuine effort in his eyes, the soft vulnerability that had replaced his usual bravado. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside me, "I got something for you." I raised an eyebrow, glancing at the envelope he held. "What's this?" "Open it," he said, his voice slightly nervous. I took the envelope from him and carefully opened it, pulling out a small card. As I unfolded it, I saw a simple handwritten note. "I'm sorry for everything, but I'm here now. Let's keep moving forward." It was a small thing, just a card, but it meant more than words could express. The apology was sincere, and the promise to move forward together, without all the baggage of the past, was something I hadn't expected. For so long, I had wondered if we would ever get past the things we'd said and done to each other. But now, there it was, a sign that things were changing, that we were changing. I looked up at Adam, my heart unexpectedly full. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know." He gave me a small, almost awkward smile, as if still unsure how to navigate this newfound openness between us. I don't want things to be like they were. Not anymore." "I don't either," I replied softly. "But we've got to take it one day at a time, and I'm willing to do that with you." And just like that, there was something in the air between us that felt more solid, more real. We weren't perfect, but we were learning, growing, and most importantly, choosing each other, choosing to move forward with honesty and understanding. The rest of the day was quiet, but peaceful. We didn't need grand gestures or elaborate words. The small moments, the shared smiles, the silent understanding were enough. I didn't need Adam to be the perfect brother or the perfect person. I just needed him to be real. And in that moment, he was. That was enough for me. The weeks that followed were a slow, steady march toward rebuilding. Adam and I had our ups and downs, of course. There were moments when old habits crept back in, when frustration threatened to rise again. But each time, we found ourselves talking through it, rather than letting it fester in silence. It wasn't always pretty, but it was honest. And in that honesty, we found healing. As for me, I continued to do the work on myself. I had learned something important that Christmas, about forgiveness, about acceptance, and about the strength it took to stand up for myself. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. But I was enough, just as I was. And for the first time in my life, I could finally believe that. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch, the warm breeze ruffling my hair as I watched the sun dip low in the sky. The world around me was still, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that peace in my heart as well. Adam joined me on the porch, sitting beside me with a sigh. He leaned back in the chair, his hands behind his head, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. Then, without warning, he broke the silence. "You know, it's weird," he said, his tone thoughtful. "I used to think that things had to be perfect, that we had to always be perfect for everything to work. But now, I think it's more about just being real with each other, not pretending like everything's fine when it's not." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride at how far he had come. "Yeah, I think that's what I've been trying to say all along. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to show up, be honest, and try." Adam turned to me, his expression soft. "I'm glad you told me all that. I'm glad we finally talked. It's like we can actually be a family now, a real one." I smiled, my eyes misting over slightly at the truth in his words. "Yeah, I think we're finally getting there." The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the yard, and I felt a quiet contentment in the air. Things weren't perfect, and they never would be. But they didn't need to be. What mattered was that we were trying, that we were here, together, working through it all. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it as a family. Not one defined by old arguments or resentments, but one defined by our willingness to grow and change together. That was the gift we had given each other, the most important one of all. "Happy New Year, Adam," I said softly, my voice filled with the quiet satisfaction of knowing we had made it through the hardest part. He smiled, his eyes reflecting the same peace I felt. "Happy New Year, sis." And with that, we sat there together, the future ahead of us, uncertain, yes, but full of possibilities. We were ready to face it, together.